Man, guys, I am so excited that we have you today, Mike Vigil. You're definitely, without a doubt, a DEA law enforcement legend. But Bobby's going to do the introductions. But before we do, I'm excited about today's show. Ever since I talked to you last week, I've been literally counting down the minutes. But before we do, let's give a welcome to everybody that's watching the show with us. We got J Cool 2289. Yes, brother. Prayers for San Diego Police. We talked about it last night for our brother who passed away day before yesterday. May he rest in peace. We'll talk about it at the end of the show. We got San Diego Police gang legend Christopher Kilby, 97, brother. We got Don't Drink and Drive, Don't Drink and Get Online. Happy Wednesday, hey, brother. Once again, thank you, brother, for all your hard work in law enforcement. We have our sister all the way from Riverside, man. You're always there, sister. Muchas gracias. And you got your cold water ready. Lista, Ceci Escano. And Mike, we have this gentleman right here. His name is Jim DeJanis. He was known as Batman. He opened up Pelican Bay. He worked there for 24 years. He was a legend. You talk to guys that did time when he was there. Everybody knew him. He was part of the security squad. He was part of the investigative unit. And he's watching us right now live. He's watching you live all the way from Thailand. And Jim, welcome, brother. We love you. Thank you for always following us and being by our side. And I loved your last episode. It was excellent. And Jim Jananis, we got Big Roger Demshock, a deputy sheriff who's a legend with the San Diego Sheriffs. We got Tim Leija. Hola, bienvenido, hermano. And we got 1967 Kid. Hola, mucho respeto desde Puerto Rico a California. Bienvenido, hermano. Bienvenido. With that said, guys, let me go ahead and take this off real quick. Let's talk about what are we drinking today. And Bobby, we'll start off with you because you're not a mandilon like me. You're actually allowed to smoke in your house, not like me. But what are you drinking? What are you smoking, brother?
I'm smoking a Espinosa Cigars, the knuckle sandwich from Guy Ferretti. It's Guy Ferretti, the famous cook or chef, all this. It's a sandwich, or it's a cigar they made called the knuckle sandwich. It's a great smoke. And I'm drinking my everyday tequila, my Lalo, with my, Mike, you'll recognize the shot glass. It's from Mexico. Here we go. Cheers. There it is.
Hey, what's the story behind your tequila? What's your story behind your tequila, brother?
Mine?
Yes.
Oh, it's just, I really like it. It's Lalo is made by the grandson. Don Julio was a very good tequila at one time. They sold to a major corporation. I think their quality has dropped, but this is still made by the family, and it's the grandson of the Don Julio brand, and it's a very good tequila. I love this one, and it's not very. It doesn't break the bank.
Every time you show us a bottle of tequila, you always tell us a great story of something that happened when you were in Mexico and how you got it. Guys, but before I forget, we got Gordo Gordito. He's a Chicago cop getting ready to retire. Over 30 years of service. Thank you, brother, once again for your service. We got Big Joe 67 all the way from Salinas. I believe he works at one of the prisons over there. And we got Upper Echelon Blessings from Jay Flores. Hey, bienvenido, Jay Flores, for watching the show, brother. Once again, thank you. Y Gordo Gordito, once again, congratulations on your upcoming retirement and everything you did for law enforcement. With that said, Mike, what are you drinking, brother?
Well, I'm drinking from a bottle of tequila in the form of a 9mm pistol. And this was brought to me by a friend who went to Mexicali and brought it back to me. And I'm very familiar with tequila, but this is probably the most unusual bottle I've ever seen. And I do a lot of interviews with Honduras and, and throughout Latin America. So they make a lot of fun of this bottle of tequila, but, I still hold it near and dear to my heart. I want to thank you guys for your service, all the individuals that are, watching this program, because I have the highest respect for anybody that served in the military or in law enforcement, because as far as I'm concerned, they're all heroes.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you. We're truly honored to have you. And Bobby, let me tell you a quick, brief story before you introduce Mike. I know you're going to read his bio and we're going to ask him some questions. The reason why I'm so excited from 2001 to 2000, no, 2000, I got promoted in 1999 to sergeant, and I was asked to put in to be the chief special assistant. I was a liaison to the Latino community, Arab American community, and the Jewish community, and I would drive the chief to all his major events. Whenever his family was together, I would provide security for them. But I remember during that time, Mike was, I believe, the SAC in San Diego, or even before that. He was a SAC in San Diego. And we would go to all these press conferences where DEA was working with a task force with San Diego, and it was a multi-agency task force. And I remember driving Bejerano, and we would walk in and we would see Mike, and Mike would always be, I mean, trim, cut, muscular guy compared to everybody else, and always had pinstripe suits. All he needed was the gangster hat. You know what I mean? And I mean, the guy was dressed like GQ. I swear to God. And I remember watching him and going, man, that Vato dress is sharp, man. I wish I could dress like that. And I remember there were several conferences that we went to, and he would always talk to my boss, Bejarano. As soon as Bejarano would get in the car, I would look at him and I go, what'd you think? He goes, that guy dresses sharp, man. And I'll tell you, that's something. And then when he would get up to speak, you know, everybody would get up with the normal, you know, this San Diego Police Department, the DEA, they all had a script. Not Mike. Mike would get up, bro, and he would talk from the corazon, from the heart, you know. And I never forgot that. And you know what? After that, I went out, bought me a couple of pinstripe suits, but I couldn't grow the big brocha that he had. But I bought me my pinstripe suits, and I was already going bald, so I couldn't have the hair. But you know what? I always admired him. I always respected him. And you know what? He was always that legend that us Chicanos, being, you know, sergeants or officers, whatever, we always looked at and said, you know what? If he can make it, we can make it, and anybody else can make it. So I just wanted to say that before you talked about him, because you know what? I for the first time, was able to really talk to him last week. And you know what? He's that same man that I met in the 2000s that he is today. And I was honored, and we're honored to have him with us. It's all yours, Bobby.
Absolutely honored. I feel like I know Mike. I have never met him, but I, you know, like all of us, so many of us who work drug enforcement. I worked many years with Phoenix DEA. I also worked with DEA overseas in Europe, in Mexico, in Haiti. But anyway, fine. And I get to see him. I do media work, so I see Mike doing many interviews in English and in Spanish. So it's an honor to have him on our show. And here's Mike's introduction. I mean, Mike, I was looking at his resume, brief resume at that, on LinkedIn. And I have friends, common friends that know Mike, but Mike retired from the DEA, from the Drug Enforcement Administration, after 31 years of service. He retired as a senior executive service level. Additionally, he served as a special agent in charge of the Caribbean and San Diego divisions. Mike was also a chief of international operations and responsible for managing all DEA offices worldwide. He also developed global counter-drug and terrorism strategies. You know, obviously, after 9/11, the terrorism strategies, we were able to join them together. Finally, people were able to figure out that many times they're the same. Mike was also the recipient of the National Association Police Organization NAPO Top Cop Award, which is the most prestigious law enforcement award you can receive. He also developed intelligence collection platforms and was recently made an honorary general by the government of Afghanistan, received numerous awards from numerous foreign governments, and also received the Admiral's Sword by former president of the Dominican Republic, Hipólito Mejia. And I talked to Mike yesterday on the phone, and one of the funny things or cool things was that I have a lot of admiration for the Policía Nacional de Colombia. And he obviously worked in Colombia, but he also, I didn't realize he had also worked in Haiti. So it's with this introduction, and we'll discuss much, but it's an honor, and I hope our guest will enjoy his appearance on our show as well. Welcome. Bienvenidos, Mike. Floor's yours.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be on your program. I've talked to both of you at length. I was very impressed with your backgrounds because you both have done quite a bit in your career. And I'm honored, especially with you being two Chicanos, because a lot of times there's not that many in law enforcement. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is recruit individuals for different law enforcement agencies. And then working with my old alma mater, New Mexico State University, where I went to school at and graduated in criminal justice. And they have a great program there. And they laid really the foundation for me to get on board with the DEA. And as you mentioned, I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration for 31 years. I served abroad for 13 years in Mexico, and then about 3.5 years in Colombia, and then also in the Caribbean. So I have a lot of both domestic and foreign experience. And that helps you when you have that type of experience, because you guys have worked in foreign arenas, and that allows you to learn a lot more than if you're just at a domestic post of duty. And I'm sure you'll agree with me on that. And one of the things that I prided myself on is doing a lot of undercover work against a lot of the major cartels in Colombia, in Mexico. And I came on board. I didn't have police experience when I came on board with the DEA. I was a very young kid. We didn't have field training officers at that time. So, I went out and started to do undercover work. I would develop informants, and I became very good at it. And the reason I was very good is because, I was able to transform myself into a bad guy. I just expunged from my brain that I was a law enforcement officer, and I converted myself into a very ruthless drug trafficker. And I think a lot of times the drug traffickers themselves were intimidated by me. So it was very interesting. And as an undercover agent, you start to really get into the adrenaline rush. But I knew that I had to curb that very quickly, because it's like an addiction. And the more dangerous your situation is, the more adrenaline pumps through your system. But as an undercover agent, you have to really control it, because if not, it could cost you your life. I worked on major cases as a young agent. One of those was James Orlando Quintana, based out of Colorado, who was one of the top 5 heroin trafficking individuals in the United States. And I used informants, could not get into him. And I finally came up with a ruse that I was a stick-up artist, that I would hold up jewelry stores here in New Mexico. I knew that they were very interested in jewelry, diamond rings, and things of that nature. So they came out one night to meet with me. They started asking me questions, and I started to deal with one of their primary lieutenants. But I was able to get a lot of conversation from them. I was wearing a wire, which I really didn't like to wear wires, because I remember on one occasion, one of the batteries started to leak acid and my skin started to burn. But I was with these traffickers and I couldn't flinch.
Wow.
So I'm sitting there with this, burning acid. But, I always learned to remain calm. And that was my biggest asset, if you will, working undercover, because the more deadly the situation became, the more calm I became. But anyway, to make a long story short,
Hey, Mike, what year was this when you were doing this undercover ordeal? Was it when you first started?
this was about, yes, a few years after I started. I came on board in December of 1973, and then about I'd say about 75 or so, I started working on the James Orlando Quintana case. And, I was, basically living with these guys and, meeting with them at bars. And it was a very exciting time. Finally made the case, and he posted bond and fled to Fresno, California. We captured him there, brought him back. He stood trial. He was convicted, and they sentenced him to several years in Leavenworth Prison in Leavenworth, Kansas.
Wow.
Later, he was brought back to Colorado, to Denver, on some other charge or a hearing. And on the way back to Leavenworth, the marshals were intercepted by his people, and they were going to kill him. And he said, no, no, don't kill him. They treated me with respect, and they put him in the trunk, and he fled. They later located him at a residence in Kansas, and they called the residence by phone, told him to give himself up, and he's like James Cagney, the gangster, the guy that played. He said, "Well, it's your job to come in and get me."
Yeah.
So he let all his minions go, gave him money, and then the house was assaulted, but he had shot himself in the heart, so that was the end of James Orlando Quintana. But he was a true gangster, an individual that a lot of people feared, killed many people. And then I had the opportunity to work a lot of undercover in Mexico and Brazil, throughout Latin America. I developed multinational operations. The first ones were very small. When I was in Mexico, I started Operation Triangle, which was Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. Then I did Unidos One, which included more countries. And then Unidos Two was of Mexico in all 7 Central American countries. And we had a lot of results, but what really came out of this is that Guatemala started to allow Mexican resources, Mexican federal judicial police, helicopters, and things of that nature to come into their territory to support some of their counter-drug efforts. So that was a huge plus, and we started to see a lot of cooperation between countries and the exchange of information. The largest one that I did was involved 36 countries from all of Central America, Mexico, Caribbean nations, and all of South America. And that brought a lot of arrests, seizures. And then one that I was particularly proud of is after the fall of the Taliban in 2001, there was a conflict there, obviously, with our military and the Taliban, who were still fighting. And at that time, Afghanistan was the largest heroin producer in the world. They had replaced Burma, or Myanmar as it's called now. And they had been seizing maybe 4 or 5 kilograms of heroin, a year in that whole region. So I brought them together to include the Chinese and the Russians, and we had a planning session in Istanbul, Turkey. In the first year of Operation Containment, as I called it, we seized 24 tons of heroin, huge seizures. So, there were a lot of things that I was doing that were very innovative. And then I also started to create intelligence centers worldwide and regional based centers, and a lot of the countries started to share information, and that really was my ultimate goal, is to get these countries to work with one another, share information, because I deemed that was highly critical, especially when you're combating transnational organized crime that are operating in different countries. And if they shared information, we could do a lot more damage, and then look at US based indictments.
Hey, Mike, I'm showing a picture right now, and it looks like you're with, he's probably a high level priest. I know he's not an imam. Can you tell us this picture, who this gentleman is? And I know it's overseas.
Yes, this is actually in Bulgaria. And I was meeting with Boyko Borisov, who was the president, the prime minister of Bulgaria at the time. So he would take me in his Mercedes Benz all over Bulgaria, and I went to several monasteries. So he was a monk, lived in a monastery, and it's really interesting because these guys hardly ever ventured out of the monastery. They made their own plum brandy, which is what we're drinking there. And
rakia. You guys are drinking.
What's that?
You guys are drinking rakia. You guys are drinking rakia, right? Rakia.
I don't know. I don't know
brandy.
if that's what they called it, but they would come out and share and bring out this bottle, and it was more valuable than what we look at tequila in our heyday. But they would share. And then there was another one that I went to, and he brings out a little bag of candy, and you would think it was gold, and he would give me a piece. He would eat a piece. His beard was all burnt, or full of nicotine. It was almost like a brownish color, but super nice people. I totally enjoyed working in the foreign arena. Made a lot of friends, a lot of good people. And as far as I'm concerned, I just really enjoyed going foreign.
Mike, can you share this experience here? Can you tell us a story about that?
Yes, this picture was taken in Romania. And I went there when I was chief of international operations. And I went to Bucharest. And then they wanted me to go address a regional meeting between all the police commanders. So they took me to a restaurant, and they started to bring out food. I started eating. And little did I know that those were the hors d'oeuvres. Then they started bringing out the main courses. And by that time, I was stuffed. But, I had to, eat, so as not to insult them. And then they presented me with this horse. And they said, "This is your horse. We're giving it to you." And I told them, "Well, I really can't accept it." I said, "Because, I don't have a place to keep a horse. My backyard was, super small." So finally talked them out of it. But this is a horse that they wanted to give to me.
Wow. And Mike, if you don't mind sharing, go ahead, Bobby. Go ahead, Bobby.
If I may jump in, there's more areas that you and I have shared, because I spent a week in Sofia, Bulgaria.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the drink you guys are drinking, it's a plum brandy. They call it rakia. And I also spent some time in Bucharest. In Bucharest, they call it palinka.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Balkans, I was in the Balkans for 3 years. They drink, when you go to a VIP meetings, you drink it out of one of these and you put it around your head and it's full of plum brandy. And what you do is everybody just passes a bottle around and you drink out of it like damn pirates. It's pretty cool. And I still have 2 bottles of rakia here with me right now from my travels over there.
I'm surprised you haven't drank them, but I'll tell you a funny story. Is when we were doing the planning session for Operation Containment, the region surrounding Afghanistan, the Russians came, and after the first day, I hosted a happy hour, if you will, and I had hors d'oeuvres, and then I had wine and beer. Well, the Russians, they want to drink wine or beer, so they went back to their room and they brought back about 10 bottles of vodka. And then all of them wanted to do the crossed arms and drink, and we were drinking goblets, water goblets full of vodka, and I must have drunk 5 of those. And after the 5, I started to feel wrong. The room started turning. So with all the dignity I could muster, I made my way back to the room. And the next morning, the only thing I had taken off is my suit jacket. So I had to rush, get ready. I had to catch a plane to go to Sofia. And the Bulgarians picked me up at the airport. They took me to this hotel. And I still remember the hotel had a Irish bar called Flanagan's. So now they wanted to start drinking again. And all I can say is I really don't have any idea how I didn't turn out to be an alcoholic, because these guys were hardcore drinkers.
Hey, Mike, if you could share this picture, tell us about this picture. What happened there?
This was a IDEC. It was an International Drug Enforcement Conference. We would bring in, police officials from different countries, and we would discuss issues, drug trafficking patterns, working together, especially working together. And the individual to my right with a mustache was a general from Greece, and they would come religiously. And I remember one time we had one in Bolivia, South America, and he came with other Greek generals, and they brought me a statue of Winged Victory, and they gave it to me, and they told me, "This is for you. You're just like us." And little did I know, I was just talking to you about taking a DNA test, and a lot of my DNA came back as being Greek. So they were apparently able to sense that I had a Greek background.
Wow. Mike, tell us about this picture. Share with us.
This was in London, and this was in the House of Lords, and that is the chair where the Queen would sit. And they allowed me to sit there and do a lot of things and take pictures and what have you. Very nice, but that was in London.
Hey, Mike, when I first saw it, when Bobby sent it to me this morning, I saw it. I thought it was Jesus Valverde at first. Cabrón, Jesus Valverde.
I think they could pass for Jesus Valverde, with a little bit longer mustache.
The mustache, yeah. Well, Mike, share with us this. Oh, this is the same picture, and then share with us this one. This is an outstanding picture.
This was in Pakistan, and there's a place there called I'll probably mispronounce it, Dara, and it's a place where they manufacture. They replicate different weapons around the world, like AK-47s, like Browning 9mm. And I went there, and they have all these kids, like about 12, 15 years old, and old men making guns, making the barrels, making the firing mechanisms, the wooden stocks, with Arabic scripture. And I wish I could have bought one of those weapons and at least donated it to the DEA museum, because they had beautiful, beautiful miniature workable AK-47s. And if you wanted to buy one, they would give you a clip full of bullets, and you would step outside into the street and shoot up in the air. And, like an AK-47 was like $20.
Wow.
Wow.
Mike, share with us this one. Tell us the story behind this. I know this is when you worked in, and tell us the story of who you were targeting, if you don't mind. We got plenty of time. I love this story.
Yes, this is in Colombia, in the northern part of Colombia, in the Sierra Nevadas, which is a mountain range that, is like between 12,000 and 18,000 feet. And it was, a staging area for, marijuana, and then also cocaine. They would store it up there, and then they would bring it down in mule caravans. The individual to my left is a Colombian National Police officer, and we were targeting an individual by the last name of David. And, he was actually Arabic, but he had married a Colombian woman, lived in Barranquilla. They owned a big hotel there, a very wealthy individual. And I remember going in there with about, 20 or 30 Colombian National Police officers and using several helicopters. So we land up there and we start running into the area, found a lot of stash locations. Obviously we weren't able to haul all that stuff out, so we just torched it. And as we were flying in there, we started receiving a lot of gunfire from the traffickers that were, taking down a mule caravan. And then by the time we torched all these stash locations, I get into the helicopter, and by this time, the area is just covered in clouds. And I'm sitting next to the helicopter pilot, and normally they would make the sign of the cross, but when I saw him do it about 5 times, I knew that
We're in trouble.
that we were probably in trouble. So it was either stay there and probably get attacked by the traffickers, or leave and take our chances of crashing into a mountain. So we flew out of there, and we were flying basically blind for several minutes, and then we saw a hole, literally a hole in the clouds, and all of the helicopters were able to get out of the area through that hole.
Hey, Mike, we have a question from Tony Gutierrez. It says, do you still keep in touch with all your contacts overseas, like in Afghanistan and all these other places? If they're still alive, do they still keep in touch with you by any chance?
I do. And one of the things that I really treasure is the fact that I still have a lot of friends, and they're like brothers. It's as you guys know, and I don't have to explain to you, it's like the band of brothers, where every day, and this is no exaggeration, every day from the Mexican feds that I work with, they sent me bendiciones every morning. Every morning I get bendiciones. How are you, my brother? I remember I got sick several years ago, and they said, look, we have a really great doctor, we're willing to fly him down to treat you in Albuquerque. We'll bring him down. And then I still maintain contact with General Serrano and General Gallego in Colombia. General Gallego was in charge of all counter-drug police within the CMP. General Serrano was the head of the Colombian National Police. And I remember, I'll tell you a very interesting story. I went to a restaurant with General Serrano one time, and we walk in, and it's kind of like a huge open area restaurant. And as we walk in, everybody in that restaurant got very silent, extremely silent. And everybody was whispering. And as we left, they all started clapping for General Serrano, because he really was an individual that fought the cartels hard, as did, General Gallego and others, because, these guys were really putting themselves on the line. I still maintain contact with General Salangi. That was the interior minister in charge of all the police in Afghanistan. Obviously, with the retaking of the country by the Taliban, he had to flee, and, he spends a lot of time in Dubai. When the Taliban started to make the push into taking over the country again, I was able to help his family get out of Afghanistan, and they now live in Virginia, all of them.
Wow. Tell us about this picture right here. Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Before we move on to this picture, I think yesterday we talked about the Colombian police, Policía Nacional de Colombia. I was very fortunate to work with them in Haiti as part of the anti-kidnapping team I ran. I was so impressed by them. And I've worked all over the world. I thought they were, especially in Latin America, the most professional outfit I ever worked with. And if you could explain, we talked about this, the admiration we have for the Colombian police.
Yes.
Absolutely. You are 100% right. They are definitely the most professional police agency in Latin America, if not the world. And these individuals, were targeted by a lot of the cartels, especially the Medellin cartel under Pablo Escobar, who put a $600 bounty for each police officer that was killed. And a lot of them died, but, very, very, very courageous law enforcement. And the battles and the war against the cartels in that country at that point in time, where they were fighting the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers in charge of the Cali cartel, Pablo Escobar, that was a narco terrorist. In fact, the term narco terrorist was based on Pablo Escobar. But I remember initially, I was assigned as the agent in charge of the Medellin office, and killings there. It was the murder capital of the world at that time. And I would leave my apartment, and I would see dead bodies strewn on the side of the road. Most of them were killed by the drug cartels, and then I would come back in the evening back to the apartment, and those bodies were still out there because the people that were tasked with recovering the bodies just couldn't keep up with the killings. And the typical assassination tactic is that two individuals on a motorcycle would follow a car, weave between traffic, and then come alongside the target vehicle and just open up and then be able to get away. They had a lot of maneuverability with these motorcycles. When I was in Medellin, I lived in a mountain called the El Poblado area, and no street lights out there. I would never have my radio on. I would have the windows down. And I remember one evening, it was very dark, and I could hear a motorcycle right behind me. I couldn't see it because they didn't have any lights, but the motors were very loud. So I started to weave back and forth on the two-lane highway, just back and forth, back and forth. to prevent it from coming alongside of me. And when I got to my apartment complex, had a security guard there, and I turn in and I grab my gun and I jump out of the car, and the motorcycle with two individuals goes by. The passenger was cradling something, obviously a weapon of some sort. But those were the risks that you had to take working in Colombia. And life at that point in time had no meaning to these drug cartels. I remember on one occasion I went with a Colombian National Police lieutenant to a place where they had live music, and we went out there to eat. And these ladies come up to the table, and it was packed. So they said, "Can we sit here?" And we start talking to them, and they're very open. They stated that they worked for a business where they did assassinations.
Wow.
So I asked them, "Well, how much do you charge for a hit?" And they said, "Well, if it's nobody of major importance, $50. If it's like a high-ranking political official, then it could range anywhere from $200 to $300. This is what they were charging."
Hey, Mike, what type of weapon did you carry while you were in Colombia? And the second question is, can you share with us that story that you shared with me about that individual, that high-ranking individual that you eventually ended up catching? They brought him to the United States. Can you share that story with us? That's a very interesting story.
Sure. The weapon that I carried was a Beretta 9mm. But if I was working undercover, it was, as you well know, it's a large weapon. If I were working undercover, I would have a Walther PPK 380, which was very easy to conceal. Anyway, one of the big traffickers that I caught was an individual by the name of Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros. You can look him up on the internet. And he was actually Honduran, but he was married to a lady by the name of Nancy Vasquez that was from Cali, Colombia, and the family was tied to the Cali cartel. Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros started off as a cocaine chemist, and then eventually, just rose through the ranks. All of them start very small, but he became probably one of the top 5 cocaine traffickers in the world. And he was supplying the Guadalajara cartel at that time. And a very horrible event occurred in February of 1985 when they kidnapped one of our agents, Enrique Kiki Camarena, right in front of the U.S. consulate located in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. They took him to a residence. They started to torture him. Eventually, they killed him. So we started a worldwide manhunt. I was in Barranquilla. I had to close down the office in Medellin because the CIA and the Colombian National Police had 2 independent sources that the Medellin cartel wanted to kidnap me, and they had paid a subversive group by the name of the Popular Liberation Army to follow me. So the ambassador, Louis Tams, ordered that the office be shut down. So I had to take over the office in Barranquilla. So we started to do wiretaps. One of the wiretaps that I initiated with the Colombian National Police was an individual by the name of Jaime Garcia. And I rented a house on the other side of one of the streets along their house. And I had some of my agents, along with the Colombian National Police officers, monitoring their calls from that house. And Garcia calls his maid one afternoon and says, "Hey, Señor is coming," in Spanish. And "Señor viene." "Señor is coming. Do you have food? Do you have everything ready?" Yes, I do." So we knew something was happening. And then I get a call. I was in Barranquilla, and I get a call from the folks there in Cartagena that there's unusual activity. So I went there. I'm not going to go into all the details, but I made a command decision that we're going to hit the house. I get the colonel. We get a couple of trucks full of Colombian National Police. And the colonel makes the mistake of having them drive in front of the house. And here I am like a traffic cop. You cover that side, you cover that side. So deployed them all around the house. The colonel and I walk up to the front door, knock on it, and the maid opens a little window next to the door. And I told her in Spanish that we were Colombian National Police. We were looking for weapons. And I asked her to open the door. She didn't want to. And then a few seconds later, who comes through the window, if not Mata Ballesteros? I tell him the same thing, and he says, wait a minute. And he moves away, and I told the colonel, I said, we're going to have to kick down the door. He says, no, let's wait. I said, no. I said, I can't wait. So I kicked the door in. Caught the poor maid and knocked her about 10 feet back into into one of the rooms. Mata Ballesteros is running through a courtyard with a 9mm handgun in his right hand up in the air, and he runs and jumps over a wall, but can't navigate the second wall. And I do a peekaboo over the wall, and he's got his gun, his weapon pointed at, up in the air. And I was going to shoot him. And he said, no, don't shoot. I can get out of a tomb. I can get out of jail, but I can't get out of a tomb. So I found out later that he had back surgery, and that's the only reason he hadn't been able to navigate the second wall. So I'm there in the room with him, and the Colombian National Police are bringing briefcases, documents, all kinds of evidence. And he turns to me and he says, I know you're DEA. And then offered, $3 million if I were to turn him loose. And he said, I can bring the money and have it here in 20 minutes. I said, no deal. That night we put him on a plane to Bogota, and we sealed off the entire Cartagena airport. He's sitting right next to me on the, just across the aisle. And he turns to me and shakes my hand, and he says, I want to congratulate you because they've been chasing me for 20 years, and you're the first one to be able to catch me.
Wow.
And sure enough, about 3-4 months later, he bribed the entire prison guard population at La Picota Penitentiary in Bogota, walked out of there to a waiting Mercedes-Benz. They drove him to El Dorado Airport, got on board one of his Aero Commanders, flew back to Honduras, where he had 2 pending homicide charges, but he quickly greased the skids, and they dropped the charges. They interviewed him in Honduras, and they said, how did you escape from the prison in Colombia? And he said, well, as I was walking, the doors kept opening. So anyway, later we went back to Honduras and said, do you want Mata Ballesteros or do you want USA? We didn't have an extradition treaty, but they said, take him. And we brought him back to the United States. He was the single largest employer in Honduras and even offered to pay the foreign debt for that country at one time. Super wealthy. So he's currently serving prison time in a penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He's not in good shape. He's trying to get back to Honduras, but I hardly doubt that the Bureau of Prisons or the U.S. Department of Justice would would allow him to return to his country.
That was probably one of your biggest cases there in Colombia, right, Mike?
It was one of them, but
One of them, yeah.
yeah, there were several others, and you know, I did the one in Brazil, so there were many because I worked throughout that whole area.
Mhm.
I did one in Brazil where I was dealing with Bolivian drug traffickers, and the individual that I was meeting with initially was the son of the justice minister under the Mesa regime. And I still remember his first name, Ruben. He was married to a Bolivian woman. He was a consul in Curambá, Brazil, for the Bolivian government. I met him and I pretended that I was a Mexican trafficker, heroin trafficker that wanted to diversify into cocaine. So started dealing with him, and he wanted to see the millions of dollars before they made the delivery. Well, you know, I had maybe $50 in my wallet. So I started, you know, talking to him, and he was very hard-headed, wanted to see the money. And then I finally played my final card, and I told him, look, if you don't want to deal with me, not a problem. I'll find somebody else. So the greed card got a hold of him, and he lied to his partners in Bolivia and told them he had seen the money. Anyway, we found a pasture in Avaré, Brazil, which was, I'd say, about 4 hours away from Sao Paulo. Took him and one of his pilots over there. They took a look at it, got the geo coordinates, and then the time came where we traveled over there. And, you know, this guy's asking me all kinds of questions. I had Brazilian federal police in camouflage uniforms laying all over the strip. You know, one guy was on a water tower with water up to his chin for hours. And he asked, well, where's your plane? Because I told him I was bringing my plane in with all the money. And I told him, well, I moved, the plane landed here, but I moved it someplace else because I don't want it to come together until you have your, you know, you deliver it was like 3/4 of a ton of cocaine. And so we're there, and he's walking around, and I'm praying that he doesn't step or see one of the Brazilian federal police that's there. And hours go by, and then finally I hear the engine sound of an aircraft, or at least, you know, I'm thinking, I'm not imagining it. And the plane comes in, he takes off his shirt, puts on a red shirt, stands in the middle of the airstrip and takes out a cigarette and starts smoking it. The plane makes a wide circle and comes back at a very low level, sees him smoking and the red shirt, which is the sign that it's okay to land. They land, and you know, the plane is just packed with cocaine, and you know, gave the signal. And one of them tried to detonate a hand grenade, but he saw dozens of weapons pointed against him. And this was almost like a storyline of, you know, one of these
Narco series.
Yeah, Narco, or you know, one of those series that what's his name?
The ones with Pablo Escobar, or the Narco series?
It's like Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible, okay,
Something like kind of Mission Impossible. And the seizure was the largest seizure in the history of Brazil at that point in time. And then I was working undercover at that same time in Bolivia. I met an individual, and he offered, you know, again, playing the role of a Mexican heroin trafficker. And I told him, he asked me if I had the money there. I said, well, not right here. I have it someplace else. but I want to make sure that you're legitimate, because there's a lot of people that pretend they're drug dealers, and they're rip-off artists. So he pulls out his badge, and he was a Bolivian national police officer, and he says, "Listen, if you deal with us, you're safe. Nothing's going to happen to you." So made arrangements to get like a 50-kilogram sample. Yeah, sample, right? And he later that afternoon, he comes in with 2 big bags with kilo bricks of cocaine hanging out. You can visibly see them. The waiters are looking at it, but they don't react. They're just kind of standing on the corner. But he comes with a lot of military personnel. And I told him, I had the money in my room. So I took him up there with the cocaine, opened the door, and they grab him. And he's wanting to shake hands with some of the national police that are there. So they threw him on the ground. And then we went out and arrested about, I'd say about 12 military personnel that were in the area that were involved in this drug deal. But one of the things that I learned working undercover is that you had to expect the unexpected, and you had to anticipate, and you had to be very quick on your feet and modify, for example, your game plan, because it always changed.
Man, Mike, you know what? Our show usually is an hour, and you know what? We're getting close. We're 2 minutes still, but we want to invite you back if you're available. October 2nd, we'll have Doug Collier, and we'll go part 2 with this interview if you're okay with it. I'll tell you, Bobby. I know you did a lot of undercover work in Phoenix, all over Arizona, but hearing these stories, what do you think, Bobby?
It's incredible. One of the things you brought up, Juan Mata Ballesteros. When I was a young narcotics cop and I first got to DEA, a book was being passed around, and it was Elaine Shannon's Desperados.
Yes.
The book that Elaine Shannon did. And I remember I think he had a whole chapter in that book. So as soon as you brought up the name, I knew who you were talking about. That was like an encyclopedia of the big narco bosses were all mentioned in there, because it covered the Kiki Camarena case. I think I still have the book here on one of my bookshelves. It was a great book.
Yeah, that's very true. And I would be happy. You guys are my brothers. So, anytime that you need me, como se dice, siempre a la orden.
Muchas gracias, Mike.
It's been an honor.
Yes.
Hey, the honor is mine. You guys are heroes.
Thank you, brother. And you know what? We'll get a hold of you. Bobby will get a hold of you. We'll schedule a date. I'm looking at October 2nd. We would love to have you come back and have another drink with us. And then we'll continue part 2. And brother, like I said, man, mil gracias de todo corazón, de parte de mi familia, from all law enforcement, for all your hard work and dedication. Thank you, brother.
No, it's been my pleasure. And, I want to, give my regards to everyone that watches the program, because it is a very worthwhile program. And I'm glad that you guys are doing it, because it brings public awareness, because a lot of people really are not aware of how the drug trade operates, the issues involved, and what have you. So you guys are doing a great public service.
Thank you, brother. We will see you, God willing, con favor de Dios, October the 2nd.
Okay, sounds great.
Gracias. God bless you, brother.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow, Bobby. What an outstanding
Blown
man.
away, bro.
Oh, blown away. Outstanding
blown away.
man. Oh, yeah. Outstanding man, outstanding individual. Just an honor. Sure, that's why I like our show. I love our shows, because we could bring men like him on our show to share stories that they've never talked about to anybody. They've never shared a lot of these experiences on CNN, on Fox News, and all these other news agencies. I can't wait for part 2. Thank you, Bobby, man. What a great, great show.
Yeah, we barely touched the surface, too. I
yeah.
talked yesterday on the phone, and it was like we barely touched the surface. So great. God, that was awesome. Really awesome.
And you know what? I like the way you planned it out for us to show pictures and then have him talk about the pictures, because it took us
Right.
all over the world basically, and we didn't even get to Mexico, but it literally took us all over the
Yeah.
world. But brother, you know what? Let me just share this real quick. Next week, for the next 2 weeks, on Ash Wednesday at 5 p.m., we have a gentleman by the name of Chris Hastings, and Chris is one of the main characters in the movie The Infiltrator, and he also wrote a book called Cocaine Cowboys Uncensored. This guy was one of the first customs agents that worked the Griselda. What was her last name? The female that was part of Escobar against Escobar. What was her last name, Bobby?
Yeah, I can't remember the narco queen there in Miami. Yes, I can't remember
Yes.
her name.
He worked her case. There's a movie that you know what, guys, if you guys get a chance, buy this book. It's only $12. You could buy it on Amazon. Cocaine Cowboys. It's called Uncensored. Read it, because next week he's going to be talking about that. Blanco. There you go. Gordo Gordito. Gisela Blanco. And if you guys get a chance, Bobby, especially you, because you're going to be covering The Infiltrator, watch that movie. I'm telling you, that is an outstanding movie. Well, for next week, he's going to be covering Cocaine Cowboys. He's currently living in the Philippines. And just FYI, Bobby, he's going to really push. Chris is going to push for retired officers to move to the Philippines. And he's going to tell them how beautiful it is. And if they're not married, they're looking for a girlfriend, they can find a girlfriend there, and how cheap it is. And so he's going to be 1 week, Cocaine Cowboys Uncensored. The following week, Infiltrator. So, guys, we got a great show coming up. And thank you, Ceci. Yes, Blanco and Griselda Blanco. But next week we got him, Bobby, and then the next Tuesday on the Gray Line, Tuesday at 5 o'clock, we got San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall. He's going to be on our show. That's going to be interesting. So please watch it. Bobby, any last words, brother? Man, what an outstanding episode today. What an outstanding episode having Mike Vigil. I loved it.
Last words would be, I feel envious. I wish I could have been born a few years earlier and got into DEA about that time. It would have been a great experience. But yeah, what an honor to have Mike on. I said, I feel like I knew him. I've heard a lot. All the DEA guys that I worked with always used to mention him. I do media work, so I see him on some of the news networks, and I do analysis in English and Spanish. And to finally talk to him yesterday was pretty cool, and to have him on our show. Looking forward for part 2 with Mike Vigil.
It was funny, Bobby, because as he's talking, I'm looking at you, because I only put him on, or I put the video, but I'm looking at you on the screen, and I could tell that you were thinking, man, I wish I would have been a DEA agent, because you would have done that and as much as he would have, brother, because you had the heart. You definitely have the heart of a hero and a legend yourself, brother. Beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
But with that said, brother, we will see you next week. It's going to be a great episode with the Cocaine Cowboys Uncensored and then Infiltrator. But with that said, Bobby, I'm going to use your line. You know what, Bobby? Before I use the line, tell everybody the story behind that line so they can understand how much we appreciate that line, if you don't mind.
The story behind the line, had a health crisis in my family. My son, who is a combat veteran Marine, Iraq, Afghanistan, lives in San Diego. I got 2 granddaughters. One of my granddaughters, just by accident, went to a doctor's appointment. Her white blood cells were very low. And for about 2 months, thought she had leukemia. And it was very stressful for my family. My son told me at one point, he said, Dad, I've lost Marine brothers in the battlefield, and this has dropped me to my knees more than anything I've ever experienced. By the grace of God, it wasn't cancer. She has aplastic anemia, which our guest that we had mentioned this before. His daughter had it. I can't remember his name. It was on a Wednesday show, but I listened.
It was Victor. Was it Victor? Victor Avila? Was it Victor Avila, the one that talked about that?
No, it wasn't Victor. No, it wasn't Victor. It was another guy. But anyway, aplastic anemia is called bone marrow. It's also known as bone marrow failure. So my granddaughter, who's 7 years old, ended up in the Children's Hospital in San Diego. Got some chemo for about 10 days. Her blood levels are now rising, and she looks like she's on the road to recovery. The success rate for a 7-year-old is very good, thank God. But my son is very strong in his faith, and his pastor, when my son went to talk to his pastor, told him, you know what? Trust the process, trust the author. This is in God's hands. It's hard for me to even talk about it because something very difficult that we went through, but she's on a road to recovery right now. And it's going to be a long process, but we also thought she was going to need a bone marrow transplant. She doesn't need it. And the treatment that she got for those days, she gets tested once a week, and her blood cells are going up and up. She looks like she's on her way to recovery.
And you know what, Bobby?
God. Amen.
Amen. And I'll reiterate, trust the process. No matter what you're going through, divorce, trauma, or a wonderful life, God bless you for that. Trust the process, but trust the author. I love that, Bobby. And our author is Jesus Christ. With that said, Roger, you're absolutely right. Next Tuesday, our shows on Tuesday are at 6 p.m., but because of the Chiefs calendar, it will be a special show on Tuesday at 5, and then our show on Wednesday is always at 5. With that said, trust the process and trust the author, Jesus Christ. God bless you. We'll see you next week.
Used to spend my nights out in a ballroom. Liquor was the only love I'd known. But you rescued me from reaching for the bottom and brought me back, being too far gone. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey,